This episode of the Tactics Meeting is brought to you in part by Gallagher Marine Systems. Gallagher Marine Systems is the industry's most comprehensive source of full-service, in-depth compliance support. And by individual supporters like you, who give us $5 a month to help us pay the expenses of putting on this great show every single week. If you like the show, if you get something out of it, jump on over to our Patreon page, give us a small monthly contribution. We would really appreciate it. Well, it's time for another episode of the Tactics Meeting, the podcast where we talk to subject matter experts about response tactics and technology. And today I'm super excited to have Meredith Austin, U.S. Coast Guard, Rear Admiral, retired, to come on the show and talk about response philosophy. Meredith, you prefer Mary? Meredith?
Either's fine. I go by both.
Okay. Meredith has been in the response community and a leader in that community for a long time. She's now doing it from the private sector and has a lot to share with us. Meredith, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah, our mutual friend Randy Ashmore, our unofficial producer for the program, my favorite planning section chief and safety officer for that matter, has brought you to the show. So shout out to Randy for putting us together. Can you start by giving us a brief history of your career and then how that career led you into the emergency management realm and into your qualifications as incident commander?
Well, sure. So I graduated from the Coast Guard Academy, and at the time, 100% of people that went to the Coast Guard Academy first went to sea. So my very first assignment was on board a Coast Guard cutter Polar Sea, which is a heavy icebreaker, which unfortunately is no longer in operation. It was a great tour and really so the first time I actually had to do something, I'd say response related, was unfortunately the last couple of days before we were pulling into port, we hit a very big storm. And unfortunately, a crew member was killed and several others were injured. And I was the public affairs officer at the time, because as a junior officer, they're like, here's a whole bunch of stuff you should do as collateral duties. I was that. And so I remember so my CO said, you're going to go talk to the media. I'm like, okay. So I walked down the brow, said to the reporters, hey, we got to get a few people off the ship because they need to go to the hospital, and then we'll be happy to bring you on board, explain everything that happened to you. Okay. They're like, yeah, okay. And so they were carrying the two people down the gangway on stretchers, and to my horror, I saw the reporters like shoving microphones into their face. And started interviewing them, which, I realize now, of course they're going to do that. But at the time I was a, brand new ensign, so I didn't realize that. So it always stuck with me that you got to always be thinking plan A, plan B, plan C, so that you can anticipate that weird things that you may never expect to happen are going to happen. I took the reporters at their word, not realizing that they got a job to do, and that is get the story, get as quick as they can and get it first, which kind of put our injured people in a bad situation because they had to then deal with reporters as they're being carried into the ambulance. From there, I went to the 11th Coast Guard District, which at the time was in Long Beach, California, and started working on my first spill within a couple of days of reporting. Two ships hit each other out near the Channel Islands, which is a marine, an environmentally sensitive area. And that was my first exposure to the strike team. I didn't know what the strike team was. I saw a bunch of guys walk in with these cool coveralls, and they're like, yeah, we're here. You can get out of the way. We're take over for what you're doing. And again, I was new, so I'm like, oh, okay, I better do that. But that sent the seed in my mind, strike team, that might be something that might be interesting to do. Fast forward about a year, Exxon Valdez occurred. I think I was one of maybe four people in the Coast Guard that didn't get sent to Alaska to respond to that spill. Interesting point, which I'll get to as I continue the story, was I was due to transfer that summer. And so the detailers said, we don't want to mess up with anyone moving. We don't want to jack up anyone's transfer, dealing with their families, missing uh, graduations, weddings, those kinds of things. We don't want to do that. So, Mary, you're not going.
That
Okay, fine.
sounds that sounds very nice. I
It
mean,
sounds nice. And in 1989, that's what they did.
yeah.
At least for people at my rank. I suspected others, maybe other things happened, but they did not want to mess up people's transfers. From from the district, I went to MS Marine Safety Office, Louisville, Kentucky, which was a wonderful job. It's on the Ohio River. As one of four junior officers, we did a little bit of everything. We did some inspections, some pollution response, some investigations. When you had the duty, you had the duty, and so we did a little bit of everything, which was a very broadening tour. It was a mile wide, an inch deep, but it was good because it got us working with industry. Again, as at the academy, when we get underway in the summer, all we did was we get underway with cutters, but it was drugs, 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 sometimes a little search and rescue, but mostly drugs. And so you got to see, anytime you saw anyone not in a blue suit, you're like, okay, you're either dirty because you got drugs on board, or you're going to be dirty because you're going to have drugs on board, or we'd miss that you had drugs on board. So it was kind of nice to see that, no, everyone is not like that. And working with industry, understanding that they have a job to do, that us as the regulators, um, our job was to help facilitate commerce, make sure people comply with regulations, but work with them. Don't just walk in there, say we're in charge, and make work stop, because that's not very helpful for anyone.
Yeah, that ship
Um,
needs to get into port and offload, or
yes.
the economy is going to slow down.
Correct, correct. So that was very good lesson to learn. The other lesson I learned, which I like to point out to people, was I remember once we gave a violation to one of the facilities. They appealed. We got the appeal back from the hearing officer. So my boss said, "All right, write them a letter saying that they're not responsible for this anymore." So I wrote a very official, dude, you're, you, we are no longer holding you responsible for this. Have a nice day, kind of thing. And my boss took out his red pen and he's like, you know, dear, Jim, we're sorry that we put you through this. Not exactly that way, but that was the tone. You're right,
Little friendlier, a
little
little more
friendlier,
casual.
and admitted that we made a mistake. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. We're allowed to admit we make mistakes. Okay, that's good to know. And that definitely helped with the trust working with industry. From there, I went to graduate school in industrial hygiene um, at University of North Carolina. And then from there, I went for my payback tour. I went and taught HAZWOPER at Yorktown. Then it was called Reserve Training Center Yorktown. Now just Training Center Yorktown, where I taught all the petty officers, all the inspectors, some maritime law enforcement classes, port operations classes. Um, Here's chemicals, here's oil, here's how to work around them safely so they don't kill
I
you.
love Haswell. I just taught it to my WISMIC incident commanders last week. I like to teach the annual refresher myself.
It's it's important, and to me, the frustration is I know people need it and they just want to check off the box, and they give the same curriculum to everyone. And what you're teaching the bosses is way different than what the worker bees need. Um, so thank you for doing that, because you can probably bring up the anecdotes where they know this is what's going to bite me in the butt if I let my workers do that. So
Well,
good on you.
we have, we've had two ship fires here that my incident commanders have responded to in the Puget Sound over the last 5 years. And so we're there, just like the FOSC is there, due to the
a threat of pollution. And so that's what allows the FOSC to put their FOSC hat on as significant threat of pollution. But in the process of this, Alaska catcher processor burning, they've got 10,000 pounds of anhydrous ammonia on board, right? That was the first ship. The second ship had almost 20,000 pounds of freon, which, is under normal atmospheric pressure and temperature, non-flammable and non-toxic, but decomposes into some pretty nasty stuff at high temperature. Well, guess what? The ship's on fire, right? So, and then, through the drone looking down on the deck, we can see, 300-pound cylinders of chlorine, acetylene. So it's not just about, we get focused on the oil and the risk of oil going in the water, but ships are covered in hazards. And that has been the focus. That's been my focus lately. Is what else is step back a little farther. What else is out there?
No, that's good to bring up. We had a fire when I was in which I'll get to, when I was in Galveston, and it was just general cargo, and there was no cargo on board. And so once the ship burned, and anything that could burn on that ship burnt, um, we sent the investigators on it, and they said, "Hey, we see these big mounds of white stuff." And what do you think it might be? And I'm thinking, when was the ship built? Oh, it was built in 75. I think it's asbestos, and it didn't dawn on anyone that, we needed to test for asbestos and have people in respiratory protection. And at the time I had a boss who was like, what, he used to say to me, he goes, you have a irrational fear of death, and, there's risks to everything. And I'm like, no, I said, my job is to help people protect themselves when they can protect themselves. And so good on you again for talking to the incident commanders, because they might want to get to something quicker. And honestly, if you step back in 5 minutes and put a control, you could be preventing lots more other problems.
I mean, there's risks to everything, but we can mitigate them, right?
Right.
I mean, there's a reason we wear seat belts. There's a reason we have airbags. Yes, there are risks, right? But we don't have to run into them naked, right?
Right.
We don't, I mean, we don't have to do that, right? That's why I don't like the short-term exposure limit, you know. Just put the respirator on. You've got a respirator. There's zero reason to
Yeah.
expose yourself at any level at this point. I just don't believe in it.
No, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. Um, so and yeah, and things haunt me because of what you're saying of people. I'm only going to be in there 5 minutes, and then they're in there for like 3 hours, and now they're
Yeah.
overexposed. Yeah.
Yeah, now they're overexposed. And
Yep.
or when they say, ammonia isn't hazardous. Well, that may be the information we have right now. I mean, it doesn't ammonia exposure. I mean, of course it's hazardous. I didn't mean that. That low level ammonia exposure over time does not cause chronic health hazards. Well, that's what we believe, but new research often gives us a new answer. So my
Yep.
my answer is just wear the respirator. Right? Just
Right.
just just wear the respirator.
Right. 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 I agree. Um, yeah, so from Yorktown, I went to Marine Safety Unit Galveston. And first I was a chief of port ops for a couple of years, and then became the XO. But that's honestly, if you're wondering at what point in my career did it really kind of steer more towards emergency management, I'd say it would be that job. Because as much as I love Louisville, we had one federalized spill the whole time I was there. And we drove up and we were about to hire a contractor, and there was a giant rainstorm, and then we had no federal spill to clean up. I wish they were all of that easy. So my boss, I mean, the XO, no, he was the CO. The CO of the time was Phil Glenn, who, another former strike team person. And so he beat into me in a good way. Go early, go big. You can always pull back, but it's harder to make up, if you start out too small. So we responded to every spill the same way. It didn't matter if the report was, 50 gallons or 5,000 gallons. There were certain things that we did every time. And one of those things, the famous Reagan quote, trust but verify, because when the responsible party calls you and says, oh, it's only like 500 gallons, we're good. And then you show up and it's, you added a couple of zeros, because they just didn't want the Coast Guard to show up. So we learned pretty quickly, yeah, don't believe it, go down, take a look, send an overflight, whatever you need to do, to make sure that you know what you're actually dealing with versus what someone tells you you're dealing with.
One of the
Um,
first lessons I was taught when I came to oil spill response, I joined Clean Sound Cooperative in 1997, and my supervisor Steve Mayo said, whatever the spiller says, times 10. That's where we start. And it's
yeah,
never it has been more, but it has never been less. It has never failed me.
right. And then the other thing we learned very quickly is when you talk to the media, when they ask how big the spill is, you say what the maximum amount of that container is. So, you don't know. Hopefully the ship's not going to sink, but you don't know. So that's the max. And then if it's less, great. And then the same thing with how long is it going to take to clean up is, in your mind, you think it's going to take 5 days. I'm going to say 8. And then if I clean it in 6, I'm a hero because
Right?
I got it done 2 days quicker. Right.
Right. I
So,
mean, giving out low number. We saw it with the Costco Busan. When you give,
yep.
you jump out, you think you're jumping out ahead of it, and you give, low numbers, you can never get it back.
Right. Right.
Right?
And then they've lost the trust.
You've
Yep.
lost the trust.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So to that, I'll bring up my favorite anecdote from there. So we got a report. The ship said, "Hey, FYI, we hit a buoy on the way out of the channel, to go into the Gulf of Mexico, and it made a little gash. It's like, I don't know, 11, 11 feet above the water line. It's like 6 feet long and like, I don't know, 6 inches high, wide. Um, we want to get it fixed our next port. We're going to New Orleans next. The weather's going to be fine. It's just the Gulf." And we're like, okay, well, why don't you just stop right where you're at? And, we're going to send an inspector. Why? I mean, it's probably fine. It's like, no, we believe you, but drop the anchor and let's say, so I get a call back from the inspector like an hour later, and he's like, it is 80 feet long. It is 6 feet long, deep, and it's a foot above the water line. And this was when ballast tanks, you could have fuel back in the day. And yeah, so water could have washed in and out of the tank. So yeah, that was again never trust but verify, because yeah, we busted him pretty good
Yeah.
there. So that all led up to so again we had a few tropical storms, so we got got a lot of ICS practice. A lot of ICS practice, multiple times a year. Prior to going there, we taught it at Yorktown, kind of the theory of ICS, but never actually practiced it. And then, like within a few days of me getting there, we had our first response or first exercise, and I'm like, oh, that's how it works in reality. So got pretty good at it, I think. And then the other thing about doing ICS down where it happens a lot, where there's a lot of incidents, is you have all levels of experience, right? So if you're dealing with a major oil company, they know what they're doing. They know how to do it. You got to make sure the stuff happens, but they have their own spill management team. They come in the room, they'll rent the space they need. They'll set everything up. It's all good. And then you have, a foreign vessel owner who only calls on the US every couple of years or never. And then they have a response and you need to set up some sort of ICS. And so, it's a QI, and then the poor QI is like making multiple phone calls a day back to Greece or whatever country the owner's from, explaining, no, I need this, I need this, I need this. And obviously when it's an oil spill, it's easier because they have the authority to spend the money. When it's not an oil spill, I'm sorry, if it's not a vessel that comes under, transporting oil for cargo, but they could still have very big fuel tanks, it is painful, right? Or it can be painful. So we had to get used to, how do you walk someone through ICS? You hand them, the Incident Management Handbook, you turn the page, you go, you're doing this here. If any questions, ask me. Bring in strike team if you need to, bring in other units if you have to, if it gets that big. But, again, it gave me a lot of practice in, here's how to do it right. Here's how to do it so we actually get it done. Here's the minimum we got to do, minimum viable product, so that we can actually respond in an efficient and effective manner. But there's going to be all sorts of holes, and it's not going to be perfect. But it is what it is. And then there also you learned that ICS is great not just for oil spill response, because the Coast Guard bought into it for oil spill response, right? And first it was trying to convince all the marine safety offices, which is what existed at the time, no, this is a good thing, you should use it. And then once they used it a couple times, people kind of went, oh yeah, this is good. Then the Coast Guard went to sectors, which was not just the M stuff, but the traditional O stuff, so search and rescue, law enforcement, that kind of stuff. And now telling those people, no, ICS is good. So, I've seen the genesis of ICS growth in the Coast Guard, from just oil spills to oil. And you know what? This will work for hurricanes. So oil, hurricanes, and then, hey, this could work for security things that we're planning. So not just events that we're responding to, but for pre-planned events. So kind of got, a good mix of different scenarios with which to use ICS, which to set up an emergency management structure. Then from there, I got stationed at the Pacific Strike Team as the CO, and that happened in August 2001. So within hours of taking over, it was still during the reception. It was kind of funny. Someone yells, "Hey, Skipper," and I'm like, "Oh, they're talking to me." "Hey, a fishing boat just sank in Valdez." Okay, so we sent a bunch of people up. About 5 days later, I get another phone call. "Hey, another fishing boat, a different fishing boat, sank in Valdez." And they were out of people. So, and their CO was on leave at a wedding and he couldn't. So I went up to that spill. Again, people up there, because Alyeska responded. So, or Alyeska serves, what was set up after Exxon Valdez. So again, that response went pretty smoothly. While I'm up there, I get a phone call. "Hey, a World War II oiler in Yap is leaking, and we need to go and see what the damage is." So I'm the CO. I'm like, okay, who's coming with me? So I went from Alaska to Yap. So in other words, the first month I was stationed there, I was gone for like 3 weeks.
Yeah. You got a career worth of experience in 3 weeks.
Yeah, so I'm kind of glad I had experience, because to bring someone in who was new, it probably would have been a little problematic. But then September 11 happens. And suddenly we get the phone call, "Hey, can you guys respond?" Because people were thinking, we responded to Ground Zero because strike teams are a special team under the National Contingency Plan. So we could either be called by Coast Guard FOSCs or EPA FOSCs or DOD FOSCs if they have a response. So EPA brought us in to help do air monitoring, and then set up what we called cleaning stations, washing stations, because they didn't want to use the word decontamination because they thought that would freak everyone out. And people were already freaked out enough in New York, so we didn't need to make the situation worse. That again, it was a place that, and it pains me to this day, where we would see firefighters walking around the pile not wearing respiratory protection. And we were doing the air monitoring, and we were releasing those results. And leadership got those results, is the best way I could say it. I'm not going to blame a rank and file firefighter.
And they didn't understand them. That's the thing. They either didn't understand what the results meant, which is
I don't,
often the case.
you're being much nicer than I am. I saw the IAP. IAP said, if you're in this region, they had a map with a, dotted line around it, wear respiratory protection. So the leaders knew. The leaders, to be fair, the leaders that were left knew. They lost a lot of leadership,
Yeah.
when the towers came down. So I think a bigger issue might have been people that were working the pile, obviously very emotionally uh distraught. I get it. Their brothers literally uh were killed. I heard people, later on, every time I put it, those masks don't work. I put it on, it clogs in like 10 minutes. So that's a pain in the ass. I can't use that. And there was no decent oversight to go, you know what? We lost 343 of our brothers. I don't want to lose any more. We're a damn respirator. We're an SCBA. I don't care what you have to do, but I don't want you breathing in that air. That air is bad. And no one, and we tried, for our little, we weren't that high in the hierarchy of the city. You know, at a certain point, it was going to be OSHA will take over because it won't be a search and rescue anymore. It'll be a recovery. At recovery, OSHA can come in. We can require people to wear respirators. Emotionally, politically, they couldn't do it, so they didn't. And the Board of Health was kind of hamstrung. So we were all of us safety weenies were very distraught that we couldn't do more to convince people that they needed to wear respiratory protection.
What was the
And
strike team using? Was this primarily particulates?
yeah, it was primarily particulate. Strike team, it's interesting because normally we would never go anything lower than a full face. Um, but they ask, first they go, do you mind wearing nothing? And we're like, yeah, we're not wearing nothing. And then they said, how about you just wear like a dust mask and then wear it around your neck? I'm like, again, that's nothing. We're not doing that. They're like, are you willing to wear half face?
Now,
Because it's
who's
scary.
asking this? Is this the city because they don't want to portray that it's dangerous? They don't want you there in respirators standing next to people who aren't wearing respirators? Is that the deal?
I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. I think it was because, again, EPA is supporting, because it was ESF 10, right? So EPA was supporting the city. And I think it was coming somewhere, not from the EPA, because they understood, but I think it was coming whoever the EPA was speaking with. It might have been coming from pretty high up. It might have been coming up from beyond the city or the state. Um, like Christy Todd Whitman, we saw what happened to her. And I think that this might be I think she was caught between a rock and a hard place. Bottom line, people weren't wearing protection as they should. So again, strike team folks were wearing half face respirators, um, because they would cycle in and out.
All
Um,
right.
but
P100s, what were you wearing? What were you
yeah,
using? Yeah, okay.
yep, absolutely. And then everyone who responded, I don't know that for sure. I I told all of my folks, the other strike team CEOs told their folks, I can't guarantee that 100% of the people are in the World Trade Center registry, but I encourage my folks to do it. I did it just so that to say, hey, they have my information too, if you're worried about that. Um, and so people are being tracked. I know that. And so they'd be covered not only by the registry and all the health things that were set up, but also by VA.
Well, been a
Um,
lot of, been a lot of information in the news about first responders' health issues following 9/11.
yeah, well, yeah,
A big campaign of Jon Stewart's.
yep.
Um, and is that what we're talking about here? Direct result of really not wearing respiratory protection during that search and rescue and
I,
cleanup?
I think for anyone with respiratory issues, for sure, probably, and some of the other illnesses that they have, it's very I know that as of, I think it was this summer, I think more responders have died post from illnesses, than did on that day. It's awful. It's
Well, even
quite
today,
tragic.
people don't like wearing PPE. You really have to establish a strong, in virtually inflexible culture of safety to say this is just what we do every day.
Right.
If it's wearing a respirator only occasionally and you give people the opportunity try to make a decision as to whether or not a respirator is necessary, they almost always default to no. And so you have to go the other direction. During the one of the ship fires in Tacoma, we routinely, and things burning. We've got smoke pouring out of this thing. Um, Although all of the Freon supposedly had been pulled back into the high pressure receiver, the fire was impacting the evaporator coils, and eventually all of that Freon burned up in the fire. And so that decomposition was in the smoke, and there were there were people going on board the vessel, dragging dewatering hoses, not wearing respiratory protection. Our safety officer kept saying, "Hey, you got to get these people off of there." It's like, well, we're only going to be there in there for a few minutes, right? That's the litany over and over again. We're just going to be there for a few minutes. And as you point out, a few minutes turns into 45 minutes, turns into an hour. They come back out for a half an hour. Oh, we've lost suction. We've got to reposition the intake of the hose. So now we're back in there for another half an hour. And before you know it, they've got 8 hours of exposure with no respiratory protection. And yeah,
It's awful. Yeah. Yeah. It's, you're right. It's something that's got to be taught at the job on day one. Everyone, the boss on down. And, to your point, you know, see, they should watch you wearing it. And then if they're not wearing it, there should be, repercussions, and then people will wear it, I
right.
guess.
I mean, obviously, I don't wear much respiratory protection these days. I go to the command post, but there is still a razor and a hair trimmer in my go bag if I were to need it. So, but that's not my job anymore.
Right. Right. I understand. I understand.
So,
So, yeah, so we went, I deployed after a couple of weeks, because it was the Atlantic Strike Team. And what was interesting, good timing, I guess, was every year the new chunk of responders would go to the Atlantic Strike Team for oil school. And so when 9/11 happened, that school happened to be going on. So they were able to have a first tranche of responders there from all three teams. And then we worked out between the three teams, we worked out a schedule, because there were people rotating in and out of ground zero for over a year until they got all of the debris away from the pile, and then it was the pit. We also had people over at the landfill to do air monitoring. So to talk about politics a little bit, this I thought was interesting. So in New York, and I'm not casting aspersions about this, it's a union town. They didn't want any of the debris from ground zero because they had the trucks with it. They put a cover over the truck. They drive the truck over to Staten Island, and they wanted to make sure that none of the debris was leaving the trucks or could blow off the trucks or whatever. So we set up, again, the washing station. So it was people with hoses, and they had to do kind of like a big truck wash kind of thing. And it had to be set up really quickly. So the Coast Guard used their basic ordering agreements that we have in order to get responders right then and there. And we did that. And apparently it was non-union workers. So for the first couple of weeks, everyone was kind of cool with that. New York was still kind of in shock. And then at a certain point, they're like, hey, those guys are non-union. So the truck drivers who were union didn't want to stop to get washed off. And so they would drive, and then we would get yelled at because trucks were leaving. And then we said, okay, let's see if we can get some, police or security or something to make sure the trucks actually stop. And yeah, those people were also union, so they wouldn't do it either. So it's like, well, as a New Yorker, I felt better that people were kind of out of the shock phase a little
right.
bit, but it made life a little interesting.
Yeah, those aren't the things that you really expect. We like the way we did like branch IEPs during Deepwater Horizon, all of those things were politically driven. And I
Right.
guess that speaks to the flexibility of ICS. I wouldn't teach it that way, but when something comes up that you need to do, we'll modify what we're doing.
Right. No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So after the Pacific Strike Team, then I was in charge of the National Strike Force, so all three strike teams and the Coordination Center and all the prep exercises. So again, this happened after 9/11, and after 9/11, Coast Guard kind of shifted more towards port security. And also now with MITSA had to do Marine Transportation Security Act, I think. And so now you had to do exercises. You always had the oil prep exercises, but now you had to do like security exercises. And so what's the best way? Your sector's already very busy. So it's an oil spill, but there might be a little bit of a security nexus, or there might be a terrorism nexus, or there might be something else. And so our exercises tended to get a little bit more complicated. Um, so that, to have people think, hey, you can't always be thinking about one thing. But I think what was lost a little bit was when it was just an oil exercise, you can really dig into it, and you can have some really juicy missiles that you could throw in to make people think about, hey, what if the boom broke over here and now it's going down near the fish hatchery. Whereas if you have to have three different scenarios kind of smooshed into the same 8-hour exercise period, you're not going to have the luxury of being able to be so deep with the oil spill. So
We did one, this was years ago, up at the BP Cherry Point refinery in yeah, up in Blaine, Washington, and they decided to exercise. This was probably 19, might have been like 2000. I don't remember. Anyway, they decided to exercise their security plan along with their oil spill response plan because why not, right? We're spending $1 million on our exercise. We've got, 300 people who are here. Let's get all the bang we can for our buck. And so the scenario had a terrorist bombing destroy the entire causeway, severing all of the crude and clean product lines going out to the dock. And they invited the FBI to
ooh,
play,
okay.
right? And so we kicked this thing off, and the FBI are like, yeah, you're done.
Right, right,
It's like,
right,
yep, we're going to MARSEC level 3. We're stopping all marine transportation traffic in the Puget Sound. This is a crime scene, and the oil spill drill just came to a grinding halt, right? You got to be really careful what it is that you're doing. It took like an hour in a deep huddle to get the oil spill drill back up and going, and the Washington State Department of Ecology lead planner and coordinator just about had kittens. Um,
yeah, sure.
and then just this last a month ago, I did a drill in Montana where the facility decided to do the same thing. Well, it's a much smaller drill, so the clean product tank failed. We had gasoline inside a secondary containment, and oh, by the way, the chain link fence has been cut, and there's a backpack sitting, and they invited the FBI to play. And so guess what? Guess who now has jurisdiction and authority? It's not the EPA, it's the FBI,
Right,
right?
right,
So now
right.
who's sitting at the head of the table? It's the FBI. And so
That's really funny. I
yeah.
mean, it's not. I mean, I feel bad for the people who didn't
The
anticipate.
FBI, I must say, the FBI were in this particular situation, the FBI were great. And the oil spill drill kept going, and I was the planning section chief, and it was fine. They were fine. And but that larger one years ago, I mean, they're just like, yeah, everybody take a knee. Or
Right, right, right. That's too funny. But yeah, so when I went to the coordination center is when the Coast Guard, I think it was Admiral Loy said, you know what, we can't be having uh, two different Coast Guard entities in ports, because prior to that, in the time I was growing up, you had even more bifurcation or maybe trifurcation, I don't know, in a port. Back when I first joined the Coast Guard, because back in the day, you had, not only did you have M, you had what was called W. So M was all of the inspections, investigations, um, port operations stuff, some of it, waterways management stuff. And then W was the pollution response stuff. And then in the early 80s, they went, well, that's stupid. So they mooshed those two things together and created marine safety offices. But then you still had groups, and the groups had the small boat stations, and they did all the search and rescue and the law enforcement things. And so when I was in Galveston, we had our marine safety unit, and then you had Group Galveston. And how well we played together was 100% dependent on the personality of the sector commander. I'm sorry, the group commander and the MSO or MSU commander. And the first year I was there, the group commander hated the Marine Safety Office. We'd have to beg to get assets to come get our folks out on scene. It wasn't unusual for us on a Wednesday morning to at 7 a.m, get a phone call. Hey, FYI, we pulled some guys off a fishing boat because they said they were sinking. I just wanted you to know. Oh, okay. What's the name of the boat? I don't know. Where did you drop the people off? Oh, we dropped them off at Shoals Field. Where'd they go? I don't know. Do you have their name? No. What was on the boat? I don't know. So then we'd have to call a helicopter. They'd have to fly out, refine the boat. Then we'd have to call a towboat to go and get it. It was ridiculous. It was totally ridiculous. The next year we got a new group commander. He was awesome. Was very much, and he had just come from an activity which was like the proto sector, where the group and the MSO are in the same unit. So he knew there's value in playing nice with each other. So totally different relationship. We worked together really well. So that if they were rescuing someone off of a helicopter, they'd call us immediately. So we would meet the vessel owner when they dropped them off at the airport, and then we'd be able to start the response then and there. So Admiral Loy said we need to do that for the whole Coast Guard. So they created sectors. And a sector is, again, the group assets and the MSO or MSU or MSDs, and you moosh them together. And they said, and then they will eventually be right sized and everything will be perfect and it's wonderful. And it's 20 years later, and we still have some sectors that are 2.5 hours away from, one office is different than the other office. But the beauty, though, is I think now 20 years later, all of the officers, the petty officers are great. They'll do with it whatever they need to do, right? But the folks that had to, like the people that grew up being group officers and MSO officers, we've all retired, right? And so it's now 20 years later, as puppies, they know, okay, I might start in enforcement and then eventually I need to go over to IMD, and then I can aspire to be the response chief. Then I can aspire to be a sector commander. And then on the other side, prevention, you got waterways management, you got inspections, you got investigations, you got a path there. Planning is still the odd duck, unfortunately. So when you have a junior officer going into planning, it takes some really good leadership by their boss to make sure that and you tell them, hey, it's gonna be hard for you, but in addition to you doing your planning stuff, I need to try to learn to be a CDO, try to learn to be a this or a that, so that in your next job, you will not have just hamstrung yourself. Because while we need awesome and great and really experienced planners, there's still not a great career path, unfortunately.
Yeah, planning's important.
Yeah,
Eisenhower said the plan is nothing. To plan is everything.
absolutely. And I think there are some senior leaders in the Coast Guard that understand that. I should say they probably all do. I mean, the commandant was an M person. So she grew up in this environment. But there's still some people that are like, especially when we first started doing ICS, where they talk about the planning P, and when you first have someone do it, especially exercises, where they're like, this is stupid. There's only 10 of us here. We should be out responding. Why am I writing objectives and why am I filling out these stupid forms? And I'm like, you're right. If this was a real event, this would happen more organically over hours, maybe even day or two. But we have an 8-hour exercise. What are you going to do? We got to mush it together. So people got a bad impression of what ICS is and what planning is, and they think it actually gets in the way of responding. And I think, and so there's that. Then there's what is the career path for planners? And so sometimes people get foisted into planning that don't want to be there, don't understand what great planning can do for you. And so it just kind of perpetuates, planning's not that important. The planning function's not that important, which is unfortunate. Although the other services have figured that out. I kind of wish we would as well.
Yeah. Just as an aside, I did have Admiral Loy, then Captain Loy, as my briefly as my CO on the midget.
I
Going
know
back.
that we're so small. It's such a
He,
small service.
he was there for like six months, and then the new commandant came in, and they yanked him to headquarters. So he wasn't there for very long. So
That's what they do. At least that's what they did back then. Now there's a little bit more geographic stability. Back when I was growing up through the ranks, it was, what was, well, number one, the pot of money they had to transfer people was larger than it is now. So if you wanted to move early, um, you could. I think my only tour early, but the first half of my career, the only tour I actually did the entire tour was Galveston. Every other job, I was there for 2 years or 3 years versus the 4 years, which gave me the opportunity to see lots of things. We don't have the luxury, I think, of doing that anymore. And with a lot of dual, especially for officers, well, actually for enlisted also, a lot of dual career spouses, it's really hard to, move everyone all over the place anymore.
yeah.
So, and
So
everything's so much more complex now too. So staying at a place to learn, the whole depth of what you can do there is probably a good thing anyway.
yeah, it is complex, and in that regard, I kind of like the Canadian Coast Guard model, where a lot of even the operational functions are performed by civilians who stay in those jobs, for a long time, so that you get continuity.
Right.
Civilians doing the search and rescue and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a balance. Not sure we've hit it, but I mean, Bureau of was it Bureau of Vessel Bureau of Investigation, Inspection and Navigation. I'm gonna get the name wrong. Someone's gonna be angry at me. But one of the precursors of the Coast Guard was, the Sultana blew up, SS Sultana, paddle wheel steamship, bringing POW Union POWs back up after the Civil War, blew up. 1,100 people were killed. It was awful. It was an issue with the boiler. And so they said there ought to be a law, and they created the Bureau of Inspection and Navigation. That was civilian. That's why Coast Guard inspectors, they don't really anymore since sectors took over. But back when I was an inspector, you wore civilian clothes. And that was a throwback to the fact that was all a civilian entity. And I know now we have civilian inspectors also at sectors to go with the active duty. But there's you got to figure out what the right balance of stay long enough to know what you're doing, but don't stay so long that you start developing blind spots, or you start you know, I don't want to say I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but getting too chummy, and then suddenly you overlook things that a new set of eyes go, hey, what about that? Oh, crap, I didn't even see that. So it's good to have the balance of new and old um eyes to look on stuff, but I think we're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah,
And
that
and
makes That makes sense. What could you tell me more about the planning function of the Coast Guard? When I think about planning, I think of ICS and the planning section chief, not so much the planning role like at the sector. I understand that they don't maybe have as great a career path. Why is that, and what is their role? Because I would think planning is the most important thing, or one of the most important things.
Well, I agree. I think it is. But it's a question of who I think ends up being in the job, what skill sets they bring, what training they've had. So the planning section, so we'll talk about the sector I had. Um, so went from coordination center to this thing called the Deployable Operations Group that no longer exists. Um, but the Deployable Operations Group had under it all of the Coast Guard's deployable forces. So besides the strike team, the port security units, the MSS, the Maritime Safety and Security teams, the MSRT, Maritime Security Response Team, I mentioned PSUs. There was a couple of others. So basically you have sectors, and then if they need surge forces, it's these things. And so our job was to man train and equip um, those specialized units. Was only in existence for 6, 7 years. It was kind of expensive. People didn't understand, like, what do you mean you're going from being in a standby to like a Bravo, you had like a Alpha, so you're deployed, Bravo, Charlie, so you're getting fixed and doing other stuff, and then Tango, which is training. You're so every month you're one of those four um, stances, and people outside of the dog lost their minds. I'm like, what do you mean you can't have the guy? Why is I have something happening in New York? I should be using MSST New York, the one stationed in New York. Why are you sending me the one from California? It's like, well, because the New York one is busy. That makes no sense. It's like we're trying to manage resources here. But it was kind of a step to A, it was very expensive. B, I think it was a step too far for some of the operational commanders to get their heads wrapped around. But what was great for me, career-wise, is I had always been, other than the cutter, marine safety, marine safety, marine safety, marine safety. And then now suddenly I have to worry about port security units and their activities at Gitmo or in Bahrain, or having to send a boarding team because something weird is happening on a ship somewhere, and that's the best resource to do it. So it brought in my understanding of all the different mission areas of the Coast Guard. From there, I went to sector Delaware Bay, which is in Philadelphia, and so that's where I want to discuss what the role of the planning. So my planning shop did, because you have the area committee, you had the area maritime security committee, you had the harbor safety committee, you had a couple of other port specific committees that we were part of because we were in the port community. We had when you had a big event like a hurricane, tropical storm, whatever, that, or ice that would mess up navigation on the river, we'd have to set up our marine transportation system recovery unit. So there's care and feeding of that. You can't just call them up and say, hey, we're going to meet today, if you don't already know the players. So the planning shop did the care and feeding and maintenance, wrote plans, because all of those things have a plan attached to them, met with their counterparts in the state or the city or the county that put these committees together. And then if we had a response, they would set up our ICS space. They'd be the planning section. If we had a big event, they'd be in charge of planning the big event. So we had the plan. So the person in charge of it was a lieutenant commander at my unit, and he had no planning background whatsoever. So it's like, okay, you manage these people and then get out of their way, was kind of the best way we had to have him handle it. And then when he had a junior officer come from a cutter to then work for him, I'm like, okay, I don't want you learning bad habits, because there's more to planning than what you are seeing. So I had him, work to get his CDO qualification and go on, do shipwriter things and just learn other things about the Coast Guard, knowing that he was going to be probably going either into an IMD job or an enforcement job after there. So I wanted, or in a command center. So I wanted to set him up for success to be able to do that at his next unit. But not every CO does that. Again, early on when I left the cutter and went to that and that district marine safety office, my boss was like, "You're useless to me until you know something. I'm sending you on every spill. I'm sending you to every school. You got to learn this stuff so that you could be more effective at your job." Because my job was processing paperwork. Anyone could have done my job, quite frankly. He's like, "You need to understand this better so that when you go to your next job, you actually have some useful knowledge." So I tried to impart that on my junior officers. They gave me every opportunity. If there was a spill or something else interesting, they would send me. Again, this was back when we had a little bit more money. Louisville, same thing. We weren't super busy. There was, lots of little things going on, but gave us the opportunity to, if there was an interesting course, the boss would send us. So I tried to instill that when I became a boss, to send my people to things, which not everyone does, unfortunately. Some people are like, "This is my human. You can't have them. I don't care that there's a big spill going on." So during that tour is when Deepwater Horizon happened. And I know you had Roger on. I know listened to that podcast, and I know he discussed, it was very chaotic. He was the sector commander in LALB at the time. I was a sector commander where I was. Things were kind of going, they were going like the month of May, and then the tides or the wind shifted, and all of a sudden oil was coming ashore. Everyone was very angry. Coast Guard realized we need to do something else. They brought Roger in. I got a phone call, "Hey, can you come and be helpful?" I'm like, "Sure." So I go down there, and Roger very quickly realized there's a lot going on here. So we talk about span of control in ICS a lot. Span of control is not just how many humans should report to me. It's how much work is being done by those humans to include me, right? So if you're the incident commander on an oil spill, you got two jobs. You got the external job, which is to go out and ground truth and make sure that what people are saying to you is actually happening. You're meeting with your stakeholders. You're doing all those things outside of the command post. But a bunch of decisions had to be made inside the command post, right? And so I think part of the issue that Ed Stanton had difficulty with was he was trying to do it. Again, I'm not criticizing Ed. He was trying to do it all because that's what he's used to, right? Is that when you're the IC, you go out, you come back. Unfortunately, when he'd go out, he was out a long time because there was a lot going on and there was a big area of responsibility. So stuff that was maybe percolating up within the command post that required the Coast Guard IC's attention wasn't getting the attention it needed because literally he wasn't there, right? So Roger got there a few days before I did. I showed up. He's like, "Be my deputy." I'm like, "Okay." He's like, and the way we worked it, again, because Roger and I have known each other forever. So I'm like, you go external, you're the IC, you do that. I'll stay here and do all the stuff, the care and feeding that has to happen in a command post, attend all the planning meetings. But for that response, there was more than just the ICS planning meetings. There was like 10 other meetings that went on during the course of the day. And then things would pop up. "Hey, what should we do about A or B? Do B," that kind of thing. Meeting with my BP and state counterparts, that kind of thing. So by bifurcating the job and having two people doing it, he was the IC. I never claimed to be the IC. And if there was something really big, I'd have, "Hey, Roger, what do you think about this?" But it really kept that to a minimum, which allowed him to have a more manageable span of control. Then at a certain point, while it was capped, Roger went back. I took over as IC. But I knew how to do at that point because we had so much experience. We had a whole bunch of deputy ICs. We had one whose sole job was taking care of the parish president liaisons because we had this very big PIPLO parish president. We stapled a Coast Guard commander to every parish president to make sure they felt that they had everything that they needed, that got the information that they needed. So that is, a big lesson I learned at that response, which is it's not just span of control humans reporting to you, it's jobs of the humans. At a certain point, we, instead of having an operations section chief, we had a deputy IC for operations who
I
was a more
remember
senior.
I remember that. I saw that vest
Yep.
walking around. Yeah.
Yep. Because before that, it was very much, and because what BP did, kind of like the Coast Guard, the Coast Guard cycled people in and out, except for certain key positions like Rogers Mine, a few others. BP was doing the same thing, and they were rotating people. They were on 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and the 2 weeks off, they were back doing their day job. And so sometimes there was a couple of BP, and they were the ops section chief because they had the expertise. They had the money. There was always a Coast Guard deputy. But there was a couple of their ICs that were like, "You're great, you're awesome, you really know what you're doing." And then a couple others would come in and we'd be like, "Ugh, not." So we realized we needed to elevate it, had the deputy IC, and then there was and then there was like the offshore ops section chief, the onshore section chief, so we ended up so if you looked at our ICS chart, it was big and scary and weird, and you had the big overall one, and then if you clicked on ops, you could blow that out, and then if you clicked on wildlife, you can blow that out. Sometimes it's what you have to do. Same thing with command staff. One PIO, yeah, you can have one, that's great, but they better have a whole bunch of assistants, and their assistants may need to have sub people. Because especially now with social media, ignore what's being said on the internet at your peril. You need to be able to have someone, or use AI or whatever you need to do. Someone needs to have their bubble on that to be able to immediately respond to whatever you see there. Liaisons, and assistants. However many you think, double it. You're going to need a lot, because there's care and feeding of folks that are a lot more complicated now than they were when you were doing this in the 80s and the 90s and even before then. It's
Well, in
just,
the
it can
80s
be.
and 90s, we kept talking about, well, we still talk about it because it's a credit item for drills. We talk about, doing the press release and the press conference. And there's a place for that. Um,
Absolutely.
but it's not, that's no longer the tip of the spear for.
It it's not, but the other thing is, the thing you got to do early on is, and really, it's harder for a bigger spill, but really for any spill, you got to get early on who's got clearance authority for press releases. Because if it has to go back to the mothership corporation that may be overseas, you've lost. I was involved in a response this summer that wasn't an oil spill. It was kind of new technology. I know I'm being vague.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You probably have
It,
some
yeah,
non-disclosures or something you have to deal with. It's fine.
and but like in the great scheme of things, I'll put it to you this way, in the great scheme of things, it was not a big deal. It was a few pieces of plastic in the water that a boat was going to go and pick up, or if any of them came ashore, they were going to pick them up. And so the sense I got was a responsible party was like, it's a big deal. It's a few pounds of plastic. We're going to pick it up. Not that big a deal. Well, the big deal was where it was going to float ashore was all in front of all these multi-million-dollar homes. And the activity that was going on was from whence the pieces of plastic and fiberglass fell, was an activity that the locals really hated, really, really hated. And so it was like, I know in the great scheme of things, it's not a big deal. But, and I'll talk about this later, it was an event, like a crisis is the incident plus event. I don't know if you've ever heard that statement before.
No, that's
So,
new to me.
I heard, let's see, Juliette Kayyem was the first person who I heard say it. But basically the incident, right? Oil spill, pandemic, whatever you want it to be, that's the incident. And then the event are all the things that go along with it. So politicians, the media, stakeholders, the economy, who is it impacting? All these things are interrelated. And if you don't handle the event well, the crisis gets bigger, right? So you have to kind of have in your mind to be able to manage and at least take a look and see what are your threat things that can impact your response. We used to joke about media boom. Why are you putting that out? It's not going to do anything. Well, you're doing it because people want to see something,
Yeah. People want to see
and
something.
it's relatively cheap, and they see it makes them calm and it increases their trust.
Yeah, we did a
And
drill. It was for it was an ethanol scenario, right? And ethanol, as I'm sure you know, as an industrial hygienist, is completely water soluble. You're not going to recover that out of the water. And we were putting out boom for the exercises. Like, well, it's not going to do anything. It's like, yeah, I don't care. I want to see so much boom going down this creek that I can step from one layer to the next, all the way down to the river, to the outfall, because that's what I want to see on the news. That's what I want to see from the pictures from the drones. That's what I want to see from the helicopter when it's posted on, Twitter and Facebook. Is it going to stop? Is it going to do anything? No. But is anybody going to understand that? No.
right, right. No, you're totally right. Um, the other thing with that spill, people down in Louisiana are used to Stafford Act.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure.
And in Stafford Act, it starts at the county, then goes to the state, then goes to the feds. And the feds are assisting the state, assisting the locals, right? National Contingency Plan is, you have a FOSC, a state on-scene coordinator, the responsible party working in a unified command. And, the feds have like 51% of the vote, but you're working together. And the state should go through their SOSC. And if they have any issues there, right? This was a very big event. It affected a lot of people. It affected people's livelihoods. There was, mental health issues. There was financial issues, all these things. Never went to Stafford Act. But people did not understand that. It's possible the politicians understood that. I'm putting my cynical hat on here. They may not have understood it either, to be honest. And the county emergency folks may not have understood it totally. But they knew the public didn't, right? And so if you could score points yelling at, the feds for doing something that they have to do under NCP, more power to you, And so, they would want certain activities to happen, we couldn't because you cannot authorize it under the NCP. If BP wanted to do it as the RP for good faith, they could, but we could not order
Sure.
them to do certain,
Well, didn't
certain
we see
things.
the same kind of situation with Costco Busan? I remember Gavin Newsom when he was the mayor of San Francisco. I believe he was testifying before that ad hoc um, committee of Congress that's set up at the Presidio on like day 7, where he said, we just spent the last 2 years planning for all hazards, only to find out that none of that matters. He was pissed. I remember that. He was clearly talking about the Stafford Act planning that they had been doing and didn't understand the NCP at that time.
That's probably right. I don't know if you knew this tidbit about Costco Busan. So it happened. Coast Guard called the state emergency management office. The state emergency management office looked and saw what county. It's Alameda County. They called Alameda, right? Coast Guard called the state. State called Alameda County. What's on the other side of Alameda County? San Francisco, right? So they didn't get a call. San Francisco didn't get a call. Gavin Newsom was on his way on vacation, going to like Hawaii or something. So this oil spill happens, and people are like, where the hell's the mayor? Why is he on vacation? We have this big oil spill. So it was probably a little embarrassing. So he was
Yeah.
probably really angry anyway.
No, I
Um,
didn't I didn't
and
know that part.
yeah, like, to be fair, that's what I was told. If
Well,
some
that's
if
what.
someone watching this and wants to correct it in the comments, feel free. But that's the story I was
Well,
told.
there's always lots of stories. My good friend Barry McFarland was the responsible party incident commander, and
Okay.
we do have an earlier episode with him about Casca Busan. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it was an interesting case. And then people, my favorite was the picture of the woman on the beach, like this, like, the scene in Platoon, because her dog's covered with oil. And it's like there were signs all over the beach that said beach closed, oil spill, and you let your dog run in the ocean, so that's on you, you know. But
that's why
that
we get all these oiled pet injects in the measles these days.
yeah, yeah, you have to do it because of that. Um, but yeah, I mean, politicians don't understand. And then more recently, you had the East Palestine, the train derailment where similar thing happened. You had, it was under NCP, and people were wondering, why is the responsible party calling the shots? Why are they doing that? And then I felt bad, like they hired you know a uh, a sampling firm, an industrial hygiene sampling firm
Yeah,
that came in and
CTH.
right, right, and did all the sampling, and people are like, no, they got zero readings because they're in cahoots with Norfolk Southern, and it's like, no, they're an accredited lab. They're following what they need to follow, and so people still don't understand, and politicians still don't understand, and frankly, they're probably never going to understand. But I think it's important for the responders to understand that if people are super angry, which they're going to be, you got to make sure that they understand we are I know we're not doing everything I don't know the best way to word this. You probably don't want to say we don't know, but we are, unfortunately, there's some things we can and some things we cannot do under the way we are responding. So if nothing else, people will understand your intent, because that's, one thing I've really learned is when people do certain things, maybe they're doing them because they're a jerk and they're awful, and that's why it's something you don't like. Or maybe they're not doing it because they're not allowed to, or they're not able to, or it's not legal, or, you know, uh, it's bird nesting season, so you can't do it this way. Um, so at least I know then they're trying their best and they're not purposely being jerks about it. And again, the hardest thing in this business, and it's gotten harder, over my career, is the trust, right? The public doesn't trust the government, it doesn't trust companies, it doesn't trust officials. So as responders, you're going in there and you're like, I'm actually trying to help. I got up 3 in the morning to drive 12 hours to get here. I'm missing my daughter's 13th birthday party. That's not important to you, but you should understand this is really important to me to help make your situation get better. And I think it's a new experience for responders to have people angry at them. So we need to do a little risk communications with our own responders to say, look, people are going to be angry. This is why they're angry. This is why you have to realize, here's some statements you can say to help build the trust. Here's how you can help bring them on board. But I think if we ignored the responders, that's bad. I saw that after 9/11. I saw that after Deepwater. Talking to people with the train derailment, you got a little bit of a psychic injury when you're doing the right thing. You're doing it for the right reasons. You're as committed to getting this fixed as everyone, but yet you're being blamed because you're wearing coveralls that say, Coast Guard or Gallagher or whatever on them, and so you're part of the problem. And it's just, I'm not sure how to solve it, but I think at least if you make people aware of it, when they get that feeling, and so like, why am I feeling so angry at at the public right now? I'm like, oh, that's right. They're concerned about this, 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 and this. I knew this might be an issue, so maybe you'll feel better about it
I know my
internally.
P. This is, I actually took a few notes from what you were saying. I'm gonna do some of those things. Uh, well, I know my PIO. You may know her, Suzanne Lagoni. She was at Deepwater Horizon.
Mhm.
Um, she has some canned press information to explain the role of the responsible party incident commander to explain that, you know, we're in the role that we're in because we have to be. I'm I'm here in Washington, so not only am I required to be in this role because of 33 CFR, but also because of WAC 173, right? I'm legally required to be here, right? I don't have a choice actually in how I manage this. And I submit plans and conduct drills and exercises to demonstrate that I can meet these, federal and state requirements for responding to these issues. And I I've never had to get out in front of that in that way before, but you saw down in I don't remember what they named it, but the incident down off the coast of Long Beach where the just a couple of years ago where the ship dragged anchor and broke the pipeline, and the pipeline owner was the RP, and the uh, I think it was the Los Angeles Times. There was a scathing news article about how, basically the fox was cleaning up the carcasses in the hen house,
Right, right,
right? Right. And and whoever the PIO was, and I think it was a Coast Guard PIO, they didn't get out in front of that situation, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And we know it's going to happen. I mean, it's
right,
inevitable, right? So we need to be prepared for that.
right. Yeah, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was during Deepwater. There was a meeting um, with the parish presidents and Admiral Allen. And I remember before the meeting, he laid out the game plan. Okay, we're going to discuss this, and we're going to tell them that, no more, we're not going to do this anymore. And because of this, we have to account for blah, 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 blah. We're going to do it. Okay, yeah, all right, we're going to do it. Finally, we're going to tell the parish presidents. And then parish presidents walked in and they started saying a couple things. And we never discussed anything that Admiral Allen just said because he's savvy enough to go, now is not the time. It's not going to be well received. There's no point in bringing it up. And we talked about something else. And so when we left the meeting, I said to him, how do you do it? I'm like, how do you deal with these, when this kind of thing happens? And he goes, don't let them rent space in your head. The next time you have to deal with this, it'll be easier. And I remember thinking to myself, I never want to deal with this again. This is awful, having to deal with people acting this way. So fast forward like 5 years, and there was a situation with the government. I think it was like 2013. It was sequestration. There was going to be like cuts and downsizing and whatnot. And this thing came out, and Coast Guard, our public affairs posture is, if you own it, you can talk about it. That's why you have, third class petty officers who'll talk about the rescue they just made. And it's great because then by the time you become an admiral, you've had a lot of practice. But in this particular case, they're like, no one talk about sequestration. If anyone calls you, just say this, no comment kind of thing. And so the public affairs people, the staff at the district at the time, they were really angry. Like, this is baloney. I can't believe they're making us do this. That's really unfair. And I remember thinking to myself, oh yeah, he's right. It is easier. It's totally easier because you understand it's politics. It's not business. And, just they're not mad at you. It's just a situation. You could be a potted plant. They're going to be yelling at you. They're playing their part. You play your part. And, but you got to, especially when things get really stressful, you have to kind of take a step back and remind yourself, of these things. They're mad because of this. Nothing you can do about it. They're going to be mad. Hopefully at some certain point, we'll figure out a good way to counteract some of the mis and disinformation that's out there. But until then, if you're doing the right thing, keep doing the right thing. Understand you'll be vindicated. And there's some people, even if you tell them everything and they understand it and they tell you, thank you for telling me all this. I appreciate it. I 100% understand the difference. And if they're nice and honest about it, they'll say, but it's an election year. So when they turn the camera on, I'm going to blame you. But I think you guys are doing a great job. And then they go off
They
and
they
they say,
literally tell you that when I turn the camera on, I'm going to blame you. But
yeah, yeah.
but
Yeah,
Right.
either that or after they got off, I'm really sorry about that. I think you guys are actually doing a great job. Like, but at least now when they say that, I can laugh with them because I'm like, it's unfair because the public doesn't know it's a game and doesn't know it's an act, a game to them. They don't
Right.
know it's an act, but you know, and so it's our job as the senior leaders in these situations to make sure that we let those that work for us who are working these horrible hours and are missing their kid's birthday party and all those things. Um, you're doing the best you can. Be happy with that, and don't worry what other people are saying.
That's hard, but that's good advice.
It's really hard.
Yeah. So what kind of advice do you think you'd give to responders to today? Where you're getting the call and you're rolling out I mean, in my view, our OSROs, MSRC, NRC, you know, they're going to mobilize equipment and they're going to start the cleanup. I mean, I work with a really competent group of people here in the Pacific Northwest at MSRC. We're going to have skimmers. If we need to do in situ burning, they're going to do it. We're ready to do all those things. No question. I feel like I, as the incident commander, can literally turn my back on the oil and focus outward in the command post because that's where we're at. But but that may not be always be the case. What do you think the most important thing is?
I think it's important to have situational awareness, not only what's going out in the field, but what's going on in the command post. I think it's very helpful as the IC to make sure you've got a deputy because again, as the span of control, again, not just people, but tasks gets bigger, you cannot give the attention that really needs to be paid. So you want to make sure that you've got someone who can walk around and go, hey, our planning section chief needs a cookie, or, you know, they haven't slept in 7 days. I remember we used to have it was like who's the best person? The best person's the one that, is uh, can't be replaced. They have to be there. They're indispensable, right? So, I had a port ops chief and it'd be like, all right, John, you've been up for, go take a nap. No, I'm good. You go take a nap. No, you go. I outranked him, so ultimately I would win because I'd order him to go. But there's no glory in being up for 3 days. I mean, sometimes you don't have a choice, but the soonest you can get to the point where you can take a nap because your brain turns to mush. I mean, I'm a big believer in the big can of chocolate covered espresso beans in a command post. They will keep the lights on, but nobody's home.
Right. I
And
used to be able to go 24 or 36 hours. I remember that version of myself. I I'm good for about 18 hours these days.
it's not good. You start making bad decisions. So you want to make sure that you get, even if it's little cat naps, that you get rested. You have and I've sometimes, I mean, when I was strike team CO, that my favorite job that I could do would we'd show up at a response and I'd be like, okay, my guys are all plugged in, they're doing cost stock and out in the monitoring and filling positions in the command post. What do you need me to do? And they're like, so sometimes they'd be the night IC, but a lot of times I would just be walking around and looking, right? Is the planning section, do they know what they're doing? Great. Logistics, do they have everything they need? IC, do they have everything that they need? Walking around, you could see someone like sitting there staring at their computer like this. Okay, that person needs a break, you know, or just someone who can walk around like a consigliere to just, they don't necessarily have a job that they're focusing in on that response. They can kind of free float and let you as the IC know everything's good, boss, or we need to hire some more people, or that planning section chief is someone's going to stab him. They're going to all take their pens and kill him because they're making everyone cry. And I've had to do that. I've had to like fire a pretty senior person on a response because they were driving everyone crazy. So if you can do that, make sure your span of control is good. that you've got good situational awareness. If you're in the command post and you've been in there for 24 hours, that's, start thinking about, I got to go out, do your overflights, do your dashboard tour or windshield tour, whatever. But you want to make sure that you know what's going on and you have whatever tools you need to know what's going on. Because if you're able to sit above, then you can, like, when things pop up, you're able to respond to them. Make sure whoever needs to get a hold of you can get a hold of you. And since you can't be up for 24 hours, make sure you've got a good deputy who could be the night IC or whatever. Write them some good standing orders so they know, okay, for these things, I trust you implicitly, do what you need to do, but for these few things, call me. Because there's nothing more frustrating, as you know, as a planning section chief, being in a command post and a decision has to be made and things come to all stop because you're trying to get a hold of the IC and you can't because their phone is off or they're doing an overflight, which is better now than back in the 90s when they'd be gone for 5 hours and you're stuck. But you want to make sure that the process can happen without you, that there's plan A, B's, and C's. So what happens if something happens to you so things can still go on? And do the best you can to argue for whatever tools you need from those above you, the agency administrator or your boss or the company, so that you can respond effectively and efficiently. And I'm not saying, throw money around. Believe me, the one good thing they taught me in the Coast Guard, especially when we had to federalize the spill, was we pinched every penny because we knew that the fund was not unlimited. And there'd be months where I remember we'd get calls saying, hey, if you have to open the fund, don't open it for any more than this amount because we're kind of out of money, and then call us for any additional. So we pinched every penny. And that's always been the mindset, to not do stuff just because it makes it look pretty. That being said, I understand there's some value to media boom, and sometimes you have to do those things because you have to do trust building steps, because that little bit of investment now will save you money and heartbreak and heartache, days from now, where suddenly you have to spend even more money because they lost the trust, and now you have to, someone from above is forcing you to do other things.
I mean, there's a middle way there between, we're going to pinch every single penny and we're not going to fund the activities that are necessary to meet the objectives that we've established in the IEP, right? I mean, if it's an objective we'd agreed to, we have to fund it.
Exactly. No, absolutely. And believe me, I've had some difficult conversations with RPs about, I come right down to, all right, either you're buying that and you have an hour to make a decision, or I'm buying it, but it's getting bought because it needs to be done.
And
if
you're
I
still
buy
going to pay
it,
for it.
Yeah. Right.
If I buy it, you're just going to pay more for it. You just get to pay for it later.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Hey, can you give me an example of a time that you actually federalized it, that you had an RP that was responding, but you decided to federalize the spill anyway? I've never had to experience that myself.
Best one that comes to mind is like a partial federalizing, if that makes sense. We had a ship in Philadelphia that it was the first time I had called to the US. The inspectors came on board, and the ship was disgusting. It was a cattle carrier. They hadn't cleaned it before she came, and which they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be so clean you could eat off them. But they hadn't done that. The firefighting didn't work. There were cans of oil, drums of waste oil on deck. It was a mess. So we brought it into port, immediately put a SOLAS safety of life at sea detention on it, because we were afraid for the safety of the crew, right? And then we knew they had to do a whole bunch of repairs, but we also knew that, so at that point, the APHIS, which I forget what it stands for, the animal safety people came on board, because the ship was supposed to load cattle and then take it overseas. They came on board. They saw how filthy the ship was. They saw where the ship had come from. Apparently, it had come from a country where hoof and mouth disease is an issue. It is not an issue in the US. We're trying to keep it that way. They lost their mind. Yeah, they lost their minds. They yelled at us. We're like, well, if you'd done the boarding at the sea buoy like we did, so that was a whole other thing. We now, then we got training, we knew what to look for. But we're like, I was afraid that the owner of the boat was going to just walk away. And now we were going to have this possible zoonotic threat in the port forever. So I partially federalized the cleaning of the oil, um, to make sure that those drums of oil got off. Um, we so that freed up the money that they would have used for that to fix the firefighting. So the ship was now safe to have a crew on board. And then I ordered it at a port because I was just afraid that over the cover of darkness, because I knew they needed to clean it, and I was afraid they were just going to shovel it off over the side, which would have made a big contamination issue.
Sure.
So it's been my experience where that has been more common, where we fed partially or if a ship goes aground, we'll take the oil off, but then leave the boat there, and it's up to them to deal with the boat. Because all I'm allowed to do is remove the pollution threat. But as far as I know, I've heard of cases where they've said, okay, we've done the cost accounting, and like it was a case where the RP wanted to be seen as being really good and really responsive. So they were doing like a Cadillac response, and we knew what their limits of liability were, and they're fast going to hit it. So we had to kind of say to them, you don't need to, you're going to come up against your cap. And if you walk away, that's going to be a problem. So you need to not be doing those very expensive things. But I think there was a case where they came up with their cap, and then we came in and paid for the rest of it.
Gotcha.
But when like first couple days, seeing the kind of Cadillac stuff they were doing, we went to them very quickly and said, you're going to run out of money, and it's fine for you because you look like you're being, these great responsible people, and then you're going to walk away, or you're going to keep paying, and then you're going to put in a claim to the fund to cover the amount over, because you can be reimbursed. If you do a cleanup and you exceed the cost of your limits of liability, you can get a refund. So we want to make sure that people stay within the limit if they can. Obviously, it's a bit of an art and a science to this. There's some spills. It's going to be like if a barge sinks, it's going to exceed the cap. It just is, right? But for other things, there's a little bit of, you don't need to pressure wash it to make it beautiful. You can just clean it to make sure no oil is released. So we have those discussions a lot, and even more so as it looks like they might be reaching the cap sooner rather than later. But you don't want to be surprised. So that cost accounting starts very quickly in a
Roger that.
response.
So now that you're retired, what are you doing now? You've got your own company, you're out and busy, you're doing responses.
Yeah, so what I want to focus on, is kind of the stuff we talked about, in the middle. Here's the, event factors that you need to think about. I'd like to help companies, maybe not even necessarily an oil spill, but just you're having a crisis. How do I respond to it? Almost like it doesn't matter what the crisis is. Here's things that you need to be considering, and here's things that you need to do. Identify your stakeholders, right? It doesn't matter if it's an oil spill or if it's a product that, all the wheels keep falling off, right? So that's what I'd like to do. What I'm actually doing mostly of is, either QI training or spill response training for, a lot of times it's for kind of the lower level workers, but I think it's good. A, it keeps me fresh and understanding what's going on, but B, it helps them understand, because normally where they're at in the organization, they have no idea what's happening above them and don't why they making me do that. It makes no sense. So I'm able to kind of impart, here's the reason why we're doing it. May not make any sense to you, but there's a good reason for it, and here's why we're doing it. So doing a lot of that, and then some speaking events, because I really enjoy doing that.
Oh, you're a good speaker, so I'm sure
Thank
that
you.
people like it when you come in and do their keynote for them.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. And again, it keeps me on my toes. I have to research, to make sure that what I'm speaking about is relevant to whoever I'm talking to. So
Yeah,
it's
it's
fun.
the same reason I like to teach ASWAPer. I don't do it that often anymore, but it keeps me sharp. And every once in a while, you're like, thank God I refreshed myself on that.
Yeah, to show how old I am. I remember reading, taking it recently and like SDSs. I'm like, when did they drop the M? And like, oh, like 10, 15 years ago. I'm like, oh. So
Yeah, I remember my first one. It was the NIOSH Pocket Guide was the green cover, and I was working for Western Pioneer as a mate on coastal freighters. And man, the stuff we did on those ships that you would never want people to do today. I mean, we carried, compressed gases in the cargo holds. Did we test for oxygen or anything when we popped those hatches? No, 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 no.
no, no. Yeah. I mean, I was a, vessel inspector before going to grad school for industrial hygiene, and so you'd be in a hold, they'd be welding over there, you get out, you blow your nose, it's all black. And then I went to industrial hygiene and I'm like, oh, okay, that was probably not good.
Yeah, that there's a year off my life right there. Oh, great. Wait, any last comments before we wrap up? You want to tell them how they get a hold of you if people are interested in having you as a speaker or as a trainer? You want to give a
Sure.
phone
No,
number or an email address?
yeah. So email address. So my company is MER, so Mayor, like the C, Crisis Advisors. So my email is mayorcrisisadvisors@gmail.com.
Yeah, and they can find you on LinkedIn
You can find me on LinkedIn.
and all those places, and quite a nice write up on Wikipedia too, I might add.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. So my last assignment before I retired was I went over to Health and Human Services for a year. I got the posting in December. I found out I was going in December 2019, and I was supposed to show up in April 2020. And then, we heard about this weird respiratory disease, right? Around January. And then in the second week of February, I get a phone call. Hey, can you come sooner? They're like, when? They're like, tomorrow. So I ended up working a year for the assistant, at the time it was called the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, responding to COVID. So that was an interesting time. And but yeah, I'm glad I was able to go over there because there was, if you remember, the cruise ships that
Oh yeah,
had,
I do.
so so we were involved. I was involved in helping because ASPR was involved in, how do we deal with getting the passengers off and getting them into quarantine, and I was involved in what do we do with the ship? Where's the ship going to go? Where's the crew going to go? So that was pretty gratifying early on in the days, and then it was just nonstop until I retired.
Yeah, my wife was the director of nursing operations at a hospital in Coos Bay, so she spent her COVID time just trying to keep the hospital staffed and open.
Sure. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was a hard time.
it was a hard time.
Yeah.
Well, Meredith Austin, Rear Admiral, Incident Commander, Industrial Hygienist, thank you for taking the time to share your experiences with us.
No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Dan. It was a lot of fun.